So welcome everyone to the second panel discussion of this event. And I'm delighted to have three great panelists here from the consumer side or representing the consumer side of the industry. So firstly, we've got Jeremy Pearce, who's the Head of Market Intelligence and Communications at the International Tin Association. So Jeremy's leading the intelligence team at the ITA and doing a lot of work on statistics and the forecasts and trends around supply and consumption. But I know Jeremy particularly has got a very long 30-year history in the industry and very good expertise on the demand side. So I look forward to hear Jeremy's thoughts. We've also got Sascha Ewert from ThyssenKrupp. He's the head of non-ferrous metals team, and he's been the head there since 2012. So he's working with tin and aluminium and with nickel. So he leads a team of 10 people. He's been working in the tin industry since 1995, and he's got a 25-year background generally in non-ferrous metals. So it'd be interesting to hear his perspective as well. And then finally, we've got Mike Hackett, who is a business manager at Keeling and Walker. So he is Keeling and Walker is part of the AMC group, as Nick, the MD, mentioned earlier in this event, and he has been, Keeling and Walker is a producer of tin oxide and performance materials. So they are very much a tin consumer based in the UK. So be interested to hear from him as well. So if we kick it off, we've heard a lot about the supply side, obviously, and the potential for supply. So I'd like to just start off by asking all of the panelists, how do you see the strength of tin demand at the moment? You know, what do you think have been the main drivers, particularly at the moment, but also over the last year for demand? And maybe we'll start off with Jeremy.
Thanks, Tom, and hello everyone. So yes, we've been looking at the trends, obviously, in the last year or two. Very detailed. It's been very turbulent, as we all know. Generally, we've seen tin demand coming very fast out of 2020, particularly in US and Europe, into Q1, and that's been generally true of all commodities. I think then we saw really that it peaked probably about May, April, when it started to get more supply constrained, and it's been flattening probably since then, mostly, although it's a very regional picture. So we see the second half being much flatter, but still very strong. Generally, that's the trends we are looking at.
Okay, that's great. And Sascha, what have you seen on your side? You know, has demand been good? Have you seen any change over the last, few months? What are you seeing at the moment on the ground?
Yeah, hi, good morning to all, and thanks, Tom, for having me here. We see a fantastic year in tin. What we discussed already, and also in the round before, we see many, let's say, challenges and opportunities in this market. And most of the people haven't seen this since their career, I would say. There's, let's say, the strong demand from the electronic industry, from different applications. Also, the tin plate industry is really in a good shape currently. And this is a fantastic year. I think you must be very happy when you are a producer with your own mine with the current tin prices. On the other side, what Jeremy mentioned, it's a little bit flattening since, let's say, a couple of weeks. So the demand, the outlook from the market is still good. The order books are still on a good level, but it's not anymore so tight as it was before. So I think it's getting a bit more quiet, but not, let's say, in a negative way, just maybe a bit more in a normal way.
Yeah. And Mike, I guess you're working in a specific area of the in terms of tin consumption, but I guess as a tin consumer for Keeling Walker, I mean, how are you seeing demand, I guess, from tin oxide producers or more generally?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Well, we're certainly finding that our demand is back to pre-COVID levels, so it's certainly bounced back in the last 12 months, and in fact, customers now are building building stocks back up after knocking them down quite low during COVID. And we see that through continuing certainly for the next few months. There's one or two customers, perhaps in the auto industry, where the semiconductors is probably holding them back, but most of our customers are still building up stocks. And so certainly the future, I think, for the rest of this year and into the first quarter looks rosy at the moment.
Okay, that's great. And then we talked a little bit about the extreme tin prices and the LME backwardations that we've seen during the pandemic era, and obviously, as Sascha mentioned, good prices are great for producers. But how have tin consumers reacted to the price environment, really? How have they reacted to these extreme high prices, extreme backwardations? And I guess as a more general question, Mark picked it up in the last session, but how price sensitive do you really see demand to, the extremes in prices and changes in price? And I will start off with, sorry, need to ask someone specifically the question. Maybe we'll go reverse this time. So, Mike, do you have any thoughts on that?
Certainly, we find some of our customers are price sensitive, some are not. And for us, particularly in something like ceramic industry for tin oxide, I'm sure you're seeing the same in tin plate and some other things. It might be that the price of the increase of tin is a very small proportion of some articles, and you don't really see that. So for us, the tin price, at the end of the day, we have to buy tin to satisfy our customers. And generally, customers have been very understanding. They see the tin price increasing. We do lots of talking to them, lots of graphs, lots of evidence that this is tin is increasing. We see this with other commodities as well. So it's not only tin, but tin is certainly escalating much more than other commodities. The backwardation, certainly for us, can be a potential problem because we are buying our tin in advance. Generally, we have been hedging, so that is a massive problem for us. And we've tried to really look at alternative strategies to try and control that and keep that cost to a minimum.
Okay, that's great. So overall, it's kind of been manageable. You just have to find the right way of convincing your consumers.
It is. Well, certainly, lots of talking to customers and talking to our suppliers and just trying to understand the contracts. And, sometimes what might be an important factor in the contract one month might change a few months down the line, yes.
That's great. Oh, I think we just lost Sascha. Oh, here we go. He's back now. I thought I was lucky so far with this event that we hadn't had too many technical difficulties, but thankfully that was a short one. I'll just go to Jeremy briefly then from that question. We talked about price sensitivity. Are there particular applications or uses of tin that you see as maybe being less or more price sensitive, particularly in the environment that we're in at the moment?
Yeah, I think so, Tom. That you sort of said, this has been said earlier in the event, but generally speaking, tin is not that price sensitive across the board, mainly because of its technical abilities. I think probably the areas that we would traditionally identify would be the chemicals area, where you are, Mike, in particular, probably more the organotins in particular, but and also kind of niche areas like obviously pewter, giftware, and that kind of thing. So it's not that price sensitive, but I think in these kind of conditions, which are not really normal conditions, I think that probably the sector that may be forgotten is the Chinese solder sector, which uses about almost 25% of the world's tin there. And obviously very high prices. You talk about bulk metal there. It's a main financing issue. So we have heard that there's a lot of wait and see. There's a lot of issues. Obviously, it's the volatility of the price, not just the high price, obviously, which is important there. So I'd put the emphasis on that for one. And the other side, obviously, is to not just point to tin, but also to all the other materials that go with tin sectors. So obviously chips, resins, steel, you name it. Everything is short. Everything is getting expensive, and so in that sense, it's not just the tin price which is worrying people, and there is a significant indirect effect on tin use from those effects as well. I would say so. So I would add that into the mix.
Yeah, so it's a bit broader than just what's happening with the tin price. I can understand that. And Sascha, do you have any perspective on that? From some of your customers or people you're dealing with, do you see that there's been a reaction to the high prices or the backwardation, or has anyone expressed any difficulties with that situation?
Yeah, I think in the beginning of the year, when the whole market get tight, everyone had to realize where he is and what kind of market it is. And after a while, we saw a lot of customers who were happy to get the material anyway, they paid the price, they paid the backwardation, because what Mike mentioned, that at the end, it's just a little part of the whole product, and everybody has to fulfill his commitments to his customers. And this was most important. So nobody really took strong attention to the backwardation. In regards to the price sensitivity in general, Jeremy, some points I agree that tin is very small, and maybe they seeing this metal as more from the technical point of view as a metal which is needed for certain applications. On the other side, when the price development is too strong, you always see a start of a certain substitution in metals and in technicals. So currently we are around $35,000 per ton tin, which is 2 weeks ago we were on the all-time high. But I want to remember also for example, metals like cobalt. When we go to the EV industry, we peaked $90,000 a few years ago. And since that, then the substitution process started. And that what you can see right now in the EV market, that the batteries for the future have more nickel containing instead of cobalt. So that means then it's at the end, I think it's also not good for metal if the price peaks too much and it's getting too tight in general.
Yeah.
I guess that's we might come on to that a bit later in terms of, I guess maybe how that affects some long-term potential for tin, I guess new technologies, and I guess if the price is high, then it's a factor in the discussion, I guess, for people that are looking at what technology to adopt. But I mean, if we kind of move in that direction now with this next kind of area of questioning, does the panel believe, or do you believe that the stronger tin consumption that we have observed during the pandemic, is that something that you think will be transitory, or do you see that representing a more permanent shift in the demand prospects for tin? And I'll start off with Jeremy, because I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about that in terms of the new opportunities, particularly.
I guess this question is not so much, is much more, a bit more short term. I think that probably it's certainly the case that there have been a lot of boosts to tin use that we've been tracking through the pandemic. Obviously, already been mentioned, working from home. Obviously, everyone having to buy new computer equipment, new IT. That's been a major thing, and we can see that in the data from computer production in China, for example, is increased by 10, or in the first part of this year 20%. So we're watching that working from home premium, but it goes across the board. I mean, Sascha, you're in tin plate, so we see really surprisingly last year was about 4% increase, and this year it's even more. Actually, coming out of the pandemic, there's actually still a strong tin plate market yet. So those kind of effects are interesting. And of course, we've got to think about lead acid batteries, people having to use, their cars are breaking down, they're having to buy a new lead acid battery. I had to do that. I'm sure others here have. So, all of these boosts have been seen. But the question is exactly as you said, Tom, is this a permanent shift? Where is there a baseline? Has lifestyle changes, have they built into the fundamentals something different? I think that is, still a question that's not clear. I think obviously working from home, everyone's using twice as much computer equipment. You've doubled up. So clearly you've got potentially a replacement market for that to think about. I think, will people carry on liking canned food? Have they got a like for it? Maybe. I think some of the effects will fade, but I'm thinking that others won't. I mean, travel, for example, what's going to happen to travel long term? It's not a huge market, but you've got electronics, aerospace, and other things which are clearly connected with travel. These questions, I think, nobody yet really knows, but there is a sense that there has been a shift. I would also point out that the pandemic has probably accelerated some of the technological changes that we're looking at in terms of the need for 5G, in terms of the need for those electronic changes. We're not seeing yet the sort of 5G acceleration. In fact, in China, probably even a slowdown. But I think that, that's the other question, is has the pandemic accelerated the technology change that we expect to see? And that's, we don't know that yet, but I have a sense that it might have done.
That's great. Yeah. And Sascha, do you think that, I mean, you're talking about maybe a bit more the next few months, the next 6 to 12 months, what's your kind of perspective on where you think demand might go from there? So we've heard it's kind of been softening a little bit, or flatlining, or returning to maybe some more normal level. Do you think that will carry on for the next 6 months? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think so. There are different. It's a different picture. Generally, I think the world growth will go up, will increase. So the general demand from the markets are good. The outlook is good. On the other side, you see it, especially also here in Germany, the automotive industry has a tightness of materials, so they have the semiconductor problems, and a huge supply chain is also affected. Not only the big car makers and the OEMs, also the suppliers to these companies are really affected. And I wouldn't underestimate this point, because the automotive is still a big industry, and maybe, I don't know, in the first half of this year, they produce much more than they needed, and we will find that out in the next couple of months. But generally, I agree with Jeremy. The trend for tin is positive, is good. Let's say the electronics, the Internet of Things, the 5G you mentioned, that's all the points where more tin is needed. But also there, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but don't underestimate the price development, because you can also, instead of solder copper tubes or pipes, you can also stick in the application. And sometimes you have some examples, it's just a small examples, but I think the general trend for tin is still very positive.
Yeah, I think, that's
And Mike, do you have any thoughts on that? I guess, at least from the tin oxide side, do you have any views on the trends there, or the next few months, where you think that's going to go? Do you think it's going to get stronger, or maybe steady a little bit?
Well, I think one of the factors this year is the transport sort of situation, logistics around the world. If the average tin container would normally take 4 or 5 weeks to get from Asia or South America to Europe or North America, now it's possibly taking 7 or 8 weeks. So that extra 3 weeks, that's probably equivalent to an extra 20,000 tons of tin, which is another sort of 5% of world consumption, or equivalent of. You might expect, if the logistics situation starts to recover, perhaps in the next 6-12 months, possibly a bit longer, that 20,000 tons might start to disappear again. But I do agree with my colleagues that the trend over the last sort of 40, 50 years is tin demand to go up about 2% a year. So I think that will be a little bit greater in the next few years. Yes. Okay,
great. And I think that's a key point as well. You're talking about, I guess, maybe the inventory or the shipping delays that we've seen across all markets this year. But I mean, do you think that consumers will perhaps look to hold a bit more inventory in the future to hedge against these kind of disruptions? Do you think that could be a shift from the pre-pandemic, or do you think we're going to just return to the way things were before from that perspective? And maybe Mike will ask if you've got any view on that to begin with.
Well, certainly the initial reaction would be to hold more tin, and then you realise, a container of tin nowadays is $900,000. So you quickly realise that that does stretch your finances, and if you're talking big volumes, that is a problem, even with very low interest rates, and the world seemingly awash with money. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, if you do hedge, then the backwardation, buying that extra tin, is a big potential problem. And if you do not hedge, then that can be a big potential problem if you've got more tin in your system and you're at risk with the market movements. So it is a balance, and certainly I think from a producer's point, sort of from our side, you have to look at all options. Your pricing to your customer, are you carrying the right amount of finished stock as well as raw material? Certainly what we have found is that it's probably much better to try and accurately gauge the shipments. So it means speaking to your suppliers much more. You soon find out which are more reliable than others. And certainly we found it's certainly easier to track some of these shipments yourself, or at least use one of these websites so you can find exactly where the vessel is and work out when you're going to receive it.
Yeah. I see. It seems like, the backwardation was a an issue for some of the artisanals, I think. And I guess maybe it's that we talk about this thing about inventory. I guess it's a factor as well. Sascha, do you kind of concur with that? Have you got anything to add on that, or a different perspective, or in terms of
sure.
inventory?
I would definitely recommend to people, to customers, to keep some stock, especially in this time. I think currently all the problem which we discussing about the logistics, the shipping, are well known and they are comprehensible for everyone. So that's when we talk to the customers, say, please keep some stock, or maybe take it now instead of waiting until the next vessel is arriving. But we see also, let's say, mixed reactions, that people are really a little bit of gambling with the logistics. So to see, okay, because of the fact that this is well known for everyone, I have an argument in my pockets, and I can say, okay, it's not my fault. It's the fault of the supplier, of the producer. But generally, I would like to have it as, let's say, a brainstorming how this industry, also with materials, can change a little bit, because this year has shown that the time of just-in-time, let's say, production, which was intended by the automotive industry many decades ago, is not the right strategy for this, let's say, current development and economy. Because I think it's more important to fulfill your orders, to have your material, and not, let's say, close a factory because of a lack of material. And this, let's say, belongs to tin, but also to other raw materials.
Sure. If we move now on to just having a bit more look at some of this long-term outlook for demand, what do you think are the long-term prospects for tin? Jeremy, did you want to add something on that?
Oh, sorry. I was getting my answer ready there, Tom.
Inventory things.
Very quickly, okay, 2 minutes. I mean, I think the big, we think of the big picture. So it's certainly true that across the world, we haven't talked yet about sort of regionalization, and sort of that's really an important factor. And we're starting to see people are realizing the need, to consider these supply chains in great detail. And we're seeing domestication in China. We're seeing the US doing critical materials reviews and things like this. Everyone is really starting to focus on this. The problem we have for tin is it's such a little known element that nobody realizes this is the glue that holds together all your electronics, just for starters, right? So we watched the Biden 100-day review of critical materials carefully. And what came out of that, they did mention tin, but it was a small amount of alpha tin inside semiconductors. They forgot that they need this tin to glue the electronics together, and the US does not have its own primary supply of tin, crucial elephant in the room, and they've missed it. So, this is, I think, the problem that tin has is the awareness of its importance, the awareness of its criticality to modern life, and in the modern world, in the future world, the need to take good care of that, and the weaknesses that are there at the moment. And this year, it's a growing awareness, I think, and it will change. Hopefully, it should change things quite radically.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think Durham even mentioned it about national stockpiles of tin, and really that there aren't really, China doesn't have one. That the US one now is very a shadow of its former self, really. It used to be, I can't remember how many tons it was. I think it was tens of thousands of tons. It used to be, a few decades ago. Now it's less than 4,000. But I guess with all this talk about critical minerals and the way things are moving and geopolitical competition, I guess that's my potential black swan in the future is, what if these countries think maybe we should start building up some inventory. But I suppose maybe with prices where they are at the moment, it's a harder sell probably. If we move on to the long-term outlook for tin, just to talk a bit more about some of these new applications and potential new uses. I guess a question for you, Jeremy, is do you see the potential in tin use as being more in existing applications like solder, for example, or in, are there new applications? I know batteries was mentioned where there are some opportunities as well. Where do you think most of the growth is going to come from?
So yes, this is obviously what we study particularly, and so for example, the answer is yes and no. So the existing uses you already mentioned, the technological changes that we are tracking, the end of miniaturization, even some more lead-free potential, for example, where there is some technological change in existing uses. I think the other ones that we're looking at obviously are the 5G and the other kind of Internet of Things and the fourth industrial revolution. I think that is what we're keen to see at the moment, is whether or not that fundamental has been happening during the last couple of years. Too much turbulence at the moment in the data to see it, but we are expecting the tin use to increase from its long-term 2%, as you mentioned earlier, towards 3 or 4%. and that's actually what we're modelling. So we expect to see that in the next 5 years, and then longer term after that, we expect to see some of the R&D we're tracking in terms of lithium-ion batteries and hydrogen and that kind of thing to pull off. The one thing I would mention, highlight, is that tin is already benefiting from the climate change revolution in China with the solar ribbon that's been mentioned earlier. So we're seeing this brand new use of tin, which is copper coated with tin. It joins together all solar cells. It's come out of nowhere from 2017 to 10,000 tons this year, headed towards 30,000 tons by 2030. We're having to add another category to our tracking to take account for it, and apparently China is just about to announce a doubling of its solar targets. So that's one to watch for sure. I mean, that's an example of what we might expect to see coming down the line.
Okay, and Mike, I mean, is there anything on the tin oxide side, or any opportunities there, or anything where you think there's a good potential future for demand there?
Yeah, we do see quite a few areas and potential customers out there that approach us and are working on some very big projects, as Jeremy has said. And it's very easy to be sceptical, but the potential is there. So, it just takes one or two of these to start working, and it can add definitely to the numbers. So I agree with that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And Sascha, is there anything you'd like to add on that in terms of where you see things are going or where the opportunities are?
Yeah, I think, as Jeremy mentioned, let's say in the part of the solar electronic industry, there's much more room to increase. There are some different trends where many companies are focusing currently. They were talking about EV mobility. They were talking about hydrogen. I'm not sure how much tin will be used in each of these industries, as at the end, tin is a small market. But I would wish to the tin industry that there's a new, let's say, chapter or a new part of industry which is growing. When I look into the nickel business, I see that there's the huge forecast, a huge boom from the EV industry, from the batteries. And this is something which maybe is also for tin potential, but I'm not quite sure if what is the clear picture in this industry for tin.
I can see Jeremy chomping at the bit
there. In terms of the EV, so you've got the use in electronics obviously is going to increase, possibly even double. But then you've got tin copper, which is the tin copper wires, bronze wires. So you have got some existing uses, and then, as I mentioned, lithium-ion batteries still in R&D being evaluated now. That's possibly for the future. So that's the answer to that. And certainly we do. The EV component of our modelling is pretty strong. And even just now, but obviously we've got to bear in mind it is still fairly long term. It'll be 2030, but 30% of EVs is still most I see at the moment.
Okay, so we are coming towards the end of the session now. So I thought there was a lot of questions that I wanted to ask that we haven't had time for, which is, I guess, testament to how much you've all had to say about this topic. But I thought I'd kind of round it off with a kind of a closing question, really. I guess an opportunity to mention anything that you haven't had the chance to so far. But what do you see as the main challenges facing tin consumers over the next decade, and what makes you most optimistic about the future, really? So maybe we'll start with Mike on that question.
I think the price, as Sascha has commented, is a big potential holdback, but one of the big benefits that we find for tin is its environmental side. Is that it is seen as an incredibly green, consumer-friendly metal, and that's why I still think there is potential out there for it to flourish even with high metal prices, high tin prices.
Okay, great. Sascha, have you got anything to add on that? So, in terms of the challenges facing consumers, really, or what you see as being the main ones for the next decade?
Yeah, I think definitely the price discussion, the let's say the spreads, the prices, the backwardation in the small market. So at the end, the liquidity. This is maybe some pain for the industry because at the end, everyone has to pay the price for the product. On the other side, let's say the opportunities. Tin is it's a green metal compared to aluminum or to other materials where you need a lot of electricity to produce, and also the recycling part is a good topic for tin. So that there's really a potential to keep this metal as a green metal and to find more markets. And that's, I think, a good way for the future.
Yeah, I think the recycling topic is one that I wanted to get into, but I noticed we were running out of time. But maybe Jeremy pick that up in your answer if you'd like to. But do you see as that being a challenge for tin consumers in the next decade? I guess you are naturally optimistic about the future for demand, but maybe you're a good person to end on, really.
Okay, well, so on my threat, I already said. I think the geopolitics, the world we're moving into, the energy crisis. We're looking at Taiwan makes 63% of the world's semiconductors. So we can sort of sense, I think, that we are by a long way from a stable future in the big picture. And as we've just said, that needs focus on supply chains and on these things. So I would identify that as something definitely the biggest threat in terms of opportunity. Yes, for sure. So there are these opportunities, and I think it's for tin consumers to focus on that and the changes. For example, in electronics, you're going to have different customers, so they're going to be people in different industries, for example, in those electronics sectors. And again, Mike, as you mentioned quite rightly, in R&D, keep an eye on the R&D sector. In lithium-ion batteries, you're going to have new customers, you're going to have new products, and so innovation, R&D, and following the trends, really important on technology.
Oh, great. That's great. So it's an optimistic end to the session. I think we've had some great panelists today, both in the producer panel and in this consumer panel. So I'd like to firstly thank all the panelists today for taking their time out, participating in what was a very enjoyable and hopefully informative session to everyone who was listening. I think we've had about 80 people for most of the event, which is a good number. Just as a final bit of, self-promotion, I think we're trying to build up our social media presence at the moment, and we're putting insights and hopefully similar events looking at metal-related topics potentially in the future as we've had today. So if I can encourage you all to follow us all on LinkedIn, there's a QR code in the top left and top right-hand corners. I'm sure you've realised if you've been following. I'd really encourage you to do that. But finally, just thanks to all the panelists and thanks to everyone for attending today. And we hope to see you all soon, and maybe another Me Week next week.